Ladies and gentlemen, Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. and Gullible John over at Bomb1st have the audacity to attack Tupac Shakur's brother Mopreme in regards to his story about what happened at the hospital, ladies and gentlemen. This one right here is for the history books. Let's get into some of this straight game.
Life is like cards. It's not what you dealt, but how you play it. Play each situation correctly. I remember they used to laugh at a brother.
Welcome back, guys. Welcome back. It's your boy Delray Richardson, platinum artist, platinum songwriter, Straight Game TV. I thank you for tuning in. I appreciate your time. Do me a favor. Click on the thumbs up button. Also, subscribe to the channel if you have not already. And like I always say, if you want to be one of the first people notified when I drop some of this straight game, please do me a favor and click on what appears to be that little bell notification right below this video. I'm going to get right into it. I had to go live on this one based on the fact that there's so much hate and low-key jealousy going on that it doesn't even make sense. You know, once again, Gullible John and Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. over at Bomb1st have now resulted to attacking Tupac's brother Mopreme and his story in regards to what he said he witnessed at the hospital after Tupac was shot in Las Vegas. Like I said, for lack of anything else to say or any kind of substantive content, you have people doing the same thing. Like I said, this is the same playbook that they attempted to do to me, ladies and gentlemen, when the facts basically have overridden the lies, if you will. And so Mopreme has done many interviews and basically he's coming out with a new book. And I think that Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. and Gullible John basically did a video saying that he doubled down. He doubled down on the fact that Mopreme had alleged that when he went to the hospital to see Tupac, that Tupac was, quote, shaking the bed and trying to tell him something, if you will. Now, this is what Mopreme is saying. I've told you guys what I understood to be true about from the people that I've interviewed, Billy Garland, also just as recent as Jamala Lisane, Tupac's first cousin, who was the first person at the hospital after Tupac was shot. She was the first person who was there, who was the next of kin. Actually, she drove to Las Vegas with Tupac along with Quincy Jones's daughter, Kidada. And she said that she was the first person there as the next of kin in regards to that situation. And so I find it ironic, ladies and gentlemen, that people such as Reggie the Rat Wright Jr., Gullible John, would now go after Mopreme. Like I said, once again, they've gone after Tupac. They've gone after various individuals in regards to trying to prove someone wrong, call someone a liar, when in fact the person who is talking in Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. has told the most disturbing lies as it relates to the death of Tupac Shakur, his supposed protection of Tupac, and the fact that he actually pulled the security off of Tupac that night. That remains a fact, no matter who he talks to, William Lisane or anybody else. Like I said, once again, in regards to that, like I said, we've heard Suge Knight speak and all of those things. But this situation right here in particular is kind of it's kind of funny because, you know, 1 minute, you know, they want to talk about how close Mopreme is a good guy and this, that, and the other, and all of these other things that they allude to. But now, once again, they're now attacking his credibility as to what he basically said in regards to what he experienced when he went to the hospital. Right. So like I said, there's been conflicting stories floating around the Tupac Shakur's final days, as we know, in the hospital, after the Vegas shooting. Some people say Pac was responsive, shaking the bed, trying to speak. Others including people very close to him, like I said, Jamala and his father, Billy Garland, say that simply wasn't possible because of his medical condition. And the word is intubated. The word is intubated for Reggie the Rat Wright Jr., who attempts to try to say what condition Tupac was in at that time. He was intubated, if you will. And so when we talk about this, we're going to break this down because most people, including Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. and Gullible John, once again, now they want to use, this is the cold part about it. At first they wanted to talk bad about Billy Garland and call him all kinds of names and things of that nature, and not really respect that that's Tupac's father. And they would have no business talking about anything involving Tupac's father's relationship or relationship with his father during the time that Tupac was alive. But now, the ironic part is the interview that I did over on the Art of Dialogue with Mr. Garland, Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. and Gullible John, who were at one time trying to criticize the video, are now trying to use the video as credibility, or should I say I wouldn't say alibi, I would say as proof, if you will, as proof that they are telling the truth in relation to what Mopreme had claimed. So Billy Garland is now the person who is coming up to basically debunk, or they're trying to use Billy Garland's statement to debunk what Mopreme claimed. When we did the interview over on the Art of Dialogue, Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. and Gullible John were trying to criticize that also. So this seems to be a playbook or something that they usually try to employ when there's lack of content. So anything that somebody says that they disagree with, they'll try to create something out of thin air as to try to criticize it without any factual information to debunk it, but by using other people's statements when in fact they have no credibility of their own. And as I get into this, I want you to focus on that because they did it to me. They've done it to various individuals, and it simply did not work, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. Was not there when Jamala Lee Singh reached the hospital. Like I said, once again, she was there. She was the first person there. And I take personally her account to being what it is that's true involving her cousin Tupac Shakur. I can't speak to whether Mopreme and what he said he witnessed is true or not true, like Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. attempts to do now using Billy Garland's statement, right? So when we talk about what's actually been said publicly, right, and why these contradictions matter overall, and how narratives around Tupac keep changing almost 30 years later. Ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about it. So look, what's actually being claimed? There are people out here trying to saying that Tupac was conscious, moving, maybe even trying to communicate while in the hospital, right? That's a powerful image, you know what I mean? Despite, what he was facing at that particular time, But here's the issue. Multiple firsthand accounts describe something very different. Medical intervention after multiple gunshot wounds is serious. He got tubes in him. He had tubes in him. He was sedated. He was on basically on the breath machine, breathing assistance. All of that changes what a person can physically do. And we're just going to talk about the facts of what it is. Like I said, once again, Mopreme said he, experienced what he experienced That's what he said he experienced. Like I said, he's coming out with a new book. He has to, go with what he said. And like I said, rightfully so. But there are conflicting statements in regards to that, right? So when conflicting stories pop up years later, you've got to ask yourself. And like I said, that's the reason for this video. You got to ask yourself, are we dealing with memory, right? Interpretation or narrative building, right? Once again, are we dealing with a person's memory, a person's interpretation, how they want to see it, how they want to interpret the situation, or are we dealing with narrative building? People, wanting it to be, whatever they want it to be because that's what they want to say that they saw from their experience, right? But, and like I said, those three things, they're not the same, right? You talk about memory, interpretation, narrative building. Those three things are not the same. They're totally three different things, right? So, and everybody, like I said, once again, has their interpretation. You can tell four people the same thing and they'll come up with their own interpretation. Why does the first hand account matter? The first person on the scene, why does that first hand account matter? Like I said, once again, people who were physically present during those crucial hours have described a situation where Tupac was heavily sedated and medically supported, meaning he was on life support, right? And that matters. You know what I mean? And like I said, once again, I know for the folklore and, who Tupac was and, the music, like I said, once again, at the end of the day, he was only human, like each and every one of us. We all human, and because trauma medicine, it's not Hollywood. And a lot of people like to go that route when they want to, trying to sensationalize on something. They want to use the Hollywood route. You know what I mean? Like, oh, it's this magical and, these stories like, no, this was real life. This was street. I would call it street justice. And violence. Like I said, on a violent level, right? And you just don't wake up and start having conversations after that level of injury, ladies and gentlemen. Like I said, Tupac had been operated on, heavily sedated. Like I said, and it was from what I understand from Jamala Lee saying, it was a horrific situation. And she basically said, and there was a video put out over on the Art of Dialogue. She said when she saw Tupac, she knew right then and there that he was going to have to fight for his life. You know what I mean? It wasn't a game. She said it was different from the Quad City shooting. You know what I mean? This right here was different. And she said once she laid eyes on him, he had the tubes coming out his nose, out his mouth. He was hooked to the machines. She said once she saw that, she knew that her cousin was going to have to fight for his life. And basically, he ultimately lost that fight, for his life, right? But like I said, because that type of trauma is not Hollywood, you know what I mean? Like I said, from her perspective, he wasn't saying anything. He didn't say anything. And you don't have conversations after those types of injuries, after going in under surgery and all of those other things, right? So when stories conflict, right, responsible media must pick sides blindly, right? And like I said, and just being responsible from the information that I've gathered and the people that I've talked to that were there firsthand. I never talked to Mopreme before, but I've talked to, like I said, Tupac's father and his first cousin, as well as William Lesane. But William Lesane said that he was in prison at the time that Tupac was shot in Las Vegas, right? So what we try to examine is the timeline and consistency, and then you deal with the medical plausibility, who was actually there, right? And whether accounts evolve over time, right? That's real journalism. That's not gossip. That's not taking somebody's word for it because, of proximity. And a lot of people, they play the proximity game because, somebody was somebody's brother, sister, whatever, like I said, or around them, people play the proximity game. And that's cool. Like I said, once again, Mopreme without a doubt was at the hospital. And so he's saying what he experienced. And my thing is, I always go with, like I said, the first-hand experience was Jamala saying she was there first. She said her and Kadada were the first person at the hospital, and she was the first person up next to Ken, and she didn't describe any kind of, and I don't know if Tupac had been worked on yet, you know what I mean, as far as the emergency surgery to remove his lung and all of the other things that they had to do to try to try to save him. I don't know about any of those things. But what I do know is she was the first person there, and she described what she saw. And it did not sound to me like it was something that he was up, talking or making any kind of statements or anything like that. So like I said, once again, and you got to look at how the Legends story, especially with Pac, how it gets rewritten, right? How something, and like I said, here's something that I've learned, covering the hip hop history, right? When someone becomes an icon, their story gets rewritten repeatedly. We've seen the documentaries, we've seen the movies, all of those things, especially with Tupac, right? People attach themselves to the narrative, right? And understanding that, you can see why it is what it is. Like I said, Mopreme has a book. I have not read it. I'm not sure if it's out yet, but he has a book coming out. We dealt with this situation recently with Jeff Pearlman and the book that he put out, that was basically full of what William Lassane called libelous and defamatory statements and stories and things. And as a matter of fact, William Lassane talked about that, somebody in his family contemplating filing a lawsuit against Jeff Pearlman for some of the things that he had said in regards to Tupac. So like I said, once again, the attaching oneself to the story, if you will. And I thought that was very powerful because, this is what's going on. And you see it. Like I said, the book ultimately flopped. Jeff Pearlman's book, ultimately flopped and has disappeared since it came out. And like I said, once again, I don't, he tried to get me to talk, and like I said, I didn't talk. I didn't want to, him writing a book about Tupac, he didn't even know Tupac. So what was the reason? Edie Amin did an interview with him and, caught him in a bunch of stories that he did not know what he was talking about. And once again, this is when you talk about Tupac's story being constantly rewritten, if you will, right? And people trying to attach themselves to the narrative, some for attention, from some for legacy proximity, right? Like I said, once again, being in close proximity to Tupac's legacy, like I said, and this doesn't include Mopreme. Like I said, that was family, you know what I mean? Even though they didn't have the same mother or father, right? Like I said, the fact that Afeni considered, and took on the Shakur last name, like I said, Mopreme and Tupac were like brothers. And so that is what that is. So I wouldn't be referring to him. And some, honestly, right, some people remember things differently. And you got to understand that. And that's fair. That's fair. But like I said, when you have people like Reggie the Rat Wright Jr., who has lied so many times, who has told so many stories, who has admitted to lying, right? I don't understand how they begin to try to attack Mopreme, a recollection of what he says he remembered, right? And like I said, honestly, some people remember it differently. That's why it's always great to, to try to document things, like I said, be it whatever it is, but more importantly, to have some kind of documentation, if you will, pictures, whatever have you, right? But Tupac's story deserves accuracy. That's the reason why, I've done the interviews that I've done and talked to the people that I've tried to talk to in regards to that, because I just wanted to know the truth about certain things that I didn't know nothing about. You know what I mean? I don't claim to know everything about him. I don't. I know the times that I shared with him, you know what I mean? And passing and partying and so on and so forth, and conversation. And so with that being said, it's very interesting, right? And the myth making, you know what I mean? And not selective storytelling, like most people want to do. You know what I'm saying? And so, like I said, Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. can't even really say he knew Tupac for 11 months. You know what I mean? Once again, Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. is the person who failed Tupac in Las Vegas. So where does he get the audacity to be able to speak anything about Mopreme Shakur or Billy Garland or anybody else from that perspective? Like I said, Suge Knight told us they asked for more security, and Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. and his company sent nobody. They sent nobody. And so with that being said, it's like you would think somebody would kind of take a back seat, but that's not who Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. is, or Gullible John, for that matter. And I was made aware that they had a live or something like that and trying to get William Lassane to hate on Billy Garland, and William Lassane didn't go for it, So it's a lot of things that are being done to try to manipulate people. Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. still up to those same old tactics, you know what I mean? Trying to create allies and turn other people into other people's enemies. And it's simply not working. Once again, in saying anything that he said, once again, the question has never been answered. Why did he pull Michael Moore off of Tupac that night? Why did he call the police on Suge Knight 3 days after Tupac died? Why did he lie and say that, try to get Frank to lie and say that Orlando tried to snatch his chain? Why did he lie and say that the walkie-talkies, the Nextels didn't have a walkie-talkie feature, right? And then would go later on and trying to get, what he said, line Keefe D up. Why would he go tell a grand jury all of a sudden, some 20 some odd years, 30 some odd years later, that the Nextels did have a walkie-talkie? Once again, it's only beneficial to him when he wants it to be beneficial to him. Like I said, once again, he pulled the same tactic in using Michael Moore when it came to go to the hospital, because he was trying to get everybody to believe that he went to the hospital and talked to Suge Knight, and Suge told him who actually did the shooting, right? Suge came out and said that was a lie. Reggie never came to his hospital room. He never told Reggie who did the shooting from that perspective. So that was a lie. But once again, like, he tried to use Michael Moore at that particular time by saying, oh yeah, y'all remember Michael Moore was there. He was there. And he said that we was on our way to the hospital. But what he conveniently left out is that's when Michael Moore said he heard the Gotham over Reggie the Rat Wright Jr.'s Nextel radio, in which Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. would then go and lie and say what? That the Nextel radios couldn't do that. But then 20 some odd years later, and you can go read a grand jury transcript, he would then go into the grand jury and basically say that he was mad at Frank Alexander because Frank didn't contact him after the fight with Orlando. And Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. knew that Frank didn't have a Nextel walkie-talkie at that particular time, but would go into the grand jury and lie and basically said, but then finally admit that, yeah, the Nextel walkie-talkies did have a walkie-talkie feature. Only when it was convenient for him to be able to say those things. And so now we see the same little tactics trying to be employed involving Mopreme, involving Billy Garland, and involving anybody else that Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. can feel like he can con you into thinking that something is what it actually isn't. And so, like I said, once again, and so when you think about, it's not just about, one hospital story, if you will, right? It speaks to something bigger. The ongoing battle over Tupac's legacy, who controls the narrative, and how misinformation spreads in the digital era. Like I said, people believe, once again, they say, well, Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. was the head of security. No, he failed. He's a failed drug dealer, a failed money launderer, right? He failed at security for Tupac and Suge, right? And he's overall a failure. And he keeps coming out, like I said, once again, every time somebody in Tupac family comes out, they tried the same thing with Jamala. You see what I'm saying? They tried to attack Jamala. It was like Jamala only saying things that she heard. Hold on, what? It didn't make any sense. The fact of the matter is, Jamala lived with Tupac from June of '96, right, in Calabasas until the day that he died, and was actually drove with him to Vegas, right? Stayed in his hotel room and slept in the same hotel room with him. Right? But once again, I'm just trying to give you a pattern here. Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. will come out and try to say what? That Jamala, she only going by what she heard. She didn't see nothing. She don't know nothing. Excuse me. When Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. wasn't even there on the trip to Vegas. He said he was already in Vegas the day before. You see what I'm saying? So once again, this is the pattern that we're following. And, you know, and like I said, how misinformation spreads in the digital era, right? Because once a story hits YouTube, podcasts, and blogs, it usually sticks. If that's what you're going with, right? You know, even if it's wrong, even if the story's wrong, even if the information is wrong, people tend to, you know, they stick to it until they hear something differently. So I just wanted to, like I said, I wanted to bring this to you because this is the thing that's been going on. And the sad part is that, you know, people are just believing anything nowadays. And like I said, whether it be politics, whether it be people just lying, you know, and then once again, you see somebody come out and they're being factual, then here comes the low key jealousy. You know what I mean? You know, the low key hate, you know? And it's sad because it's so predictable. You know, it's so predictable. It's like, wow, you know, you would think that, you know, people would kind of have a little bit more respect for the truth and the facts, and people coming out from Tupac's family actually sharing their story and speaking out. You would think that would be something that would be respected, but not by certain people. Like I said, they're always going to remain jealous. They're always going to be haters. They're always going to, no matter how, you know, good that you think that they could be possibly doing on their own, they're always going to hate because that's just who they are. That's in their makeup. And unfortunately for me, like I said, I seen that when Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. tried to come after me, try to file a frivolous lawsuit and all of these other things, right? And it was like, wow, you know, the battle for the lies to conquer all is in full force. But once again, we beat that down with the truth, with the facts. You understand what I'm saying? And that's usually going to win in the long run anyway. Like I said, you know, you might get a laugh or you might get a little temporary win with the lie. But like I said, later on, the truth going to prevail. And usually the people don't be there to participate or to listen to the truth like they do the lie. The lie is much more entertaining, I will admit. You know what I mean? So when you understand that aspect of it, you know, it is what it is. And so now, and like I said, Tupac's family deserves better than confusion at the end of the day. You know what I mean? That's why they come out speaking. You know, Billy Garland, like I said, it took me a year to get an interview with him. Jamala Lee saying like 2 years to, you know, talk to her, you know what I'm saying? And really sit down and have a good conversation, as you can see over on Art of Dialogue. So like I said, once again, and the big question is, right? So here's what I want you to be thinking about, right? Are we hearing genuine memories? You got to ask yourself, are we hearing genuine memories, or people reshaping history decades later? You know what I mean? And more importantly, who benefits from each version? Because that usually tells you everything. You know what I mean? People telling different versions of stories and things like that, and how they try to benefit from it. And so, once again, like I said, I gave you the Jamala Lee Singh perspective, Billy Garland perspective, you know, William Lassane perspective. And like I said, you can basically figure it out for yourself. You know, Mopreme has his story, you know, and like I said, I choose to believe the first person who was on the scene. You know what I mean? And I choose to believe the Billy Garland, and when I talk to him about his son, because he has no reason to lie about the condition of his son and what he saw when he went to the hospital. like I said once again, Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. also tried to go after Billy Garland and talk about how a Feeney paid for Billy Garland to come to Las Vegas. Right? I even put out that Billy Garland actually gave me, because he still had copies of his ticket, and he flew Continental Airlines. You see what I'm saying? So all of these things that I've brung to you in the namesake of truth and understanding and substantive information, that you could say, okay, cool, this is the way that it happened, because here go the documentation. Here's the information that's more valuable than anything, right? Like I said, more importantly, so you got to ask yourself. When you ask who's benefiting from the new versions of stories, because that usually tells you everything, right? Like I said, ladies and gentlemen, drop your thoughts in the comments. Very important. Do you think the hospital stories have been exaggerated? Do you think some stories have been exaggerated, or do you believe some accounts are being unfairly dismissed? You feel me? Like I said, based on what people want to believe. Let's have a real conversation. Like I said, once again, ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate your time. Everybody in the chat, what's good? Who we got? Rolling with Jay. Everybody outside the chat, if you have not joined, you know what I mean? Please do. Like I said, once again, subscribe to the channel. More importantly, but I just needed to make this video because I think it's so disrespectful to the family that every time they come out and speak out, and I do an interview with them, somebody else do an interview with them, or whatever, somebody has Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. and Gullible John has something to say, but they really don't have anything to say, but they proceed to talk anyway. Like I said. Well, who's that quit hating? What's happening? Word up. Who else? Stephon Willis and everybody else in the chat. Like I said, who's that? C-Dub. What's up, C-Dub? And everybody else in the chat. Like I say, I appreciate you guys. And when the people that come in the chat and watch a little bit later, like I said, I appreciate you too. If you have not, like I said, once again, if you have not subscribed to the channel yet, please do. We appreciate your time. We appreciate your opinion and your comments. Let me see who's it. He said Jay-Z, talking about Jay-Z in the NFL. Somebody asked, he said, has Reggie ever said where he was when everything? Yeah, Reggie basically tried to say that he was at Club 662. Like I said, Keefe D said that he saw him in the entourage right before the shots went off. That's in the 2009 statement with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police. All of those things gonna get brought up in court, ladies and gentlemen. You can best believe that. So like I said, we don't know. What we do know is, and like I said once again, Suge Knight said that Keefe D also told him at a New York Nets Lakers game that Reggie was involved and security was involved, and it was basically in corroboration what Suge Knight was explaining, saying that in retaliation for Tupac firing Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. approximately 11 days earlier. And you can see, like I said once again, you can see, when you talk about motive, you can see how that could be a motive in being upset and being mad and being retaliatory. Like I said, these were Suge Knight's words. This the guy who actually was the CEO. He said that, from what Keefe D had told him at that New Jersey Nets at the time, I'm sorry, Los Angeles Laker game, that and you can go over on the Art of Dialogue and hear that. That's what Suge Knight actually said. He said and for Tupac firing Reggie the Rat Wright Jr., he said that Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. and them fired back. And he said that Keefe D told him the whole story about what happened and why it went down like that. That's on the Art of Dialogue. You got to go listen to it. Like I said, very, very, and we haven't heard from Suge. I don't know, what's going on. Like I said, I don't know if they kind of clamped down on the phone calls and, the calls from prison or whatever. But yeah, that's what he said. So like I said, we gonna see what happens, man, in a couple of months. Like I said, we in February. March, April, May, June, July, August. We got what, like 6 months. And well, yeah, actually, ladies and gentlemen, it's 6 months from today. Today's the 10th. The trial starts August 10th. So that'll be 6 months from the day to today that Tupac murder trial is going to actually start. No, I actually don't watch Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. A lot of people come and hit me with links to videos and things like that. So a lot of stuff I miss. You know what I mean? To be perfectly honest with you, I got a whole life I live. You know what I mean? And like I said, trading stocks and doing a whole bunch of other things that I do. Like I said, so please don't get it twisted. You know what I mean? As to what you think is going on versus what's really not going on. And so, like I said, for the people who know, you can check the video I put out. I also started a new website, basically an app, and it's called tradecraft.org. Ladies and gentlemen, tradecraft.org, and you can go on there and it teaches you how to trade, the fundamentals of stock trading. You know what I mean? I've never seen nothing done like that before, but you can go on there, tradecraft with a K, .org, and you can go on there and you can learn how to trade. Like I said, a lot of people say they want money, right? As a matter of fact, let me put it on. Let me put it in the what's the name? That's the website. I just wrote it down in the chat. Yeah, go check it out, man. Like I said, if you want to learn how to trade, it's free. Like I said, you can play person to person. People can challenge each other, and as far as investing and buying certain commodities and things like that, to get your trade game up. So when you want to jump over to a Charles Schwab account, Fidelity, what else? Who else? What else is the other one? Robinhood. You want to jump into a Robinhood account. Like I said, once again, you'll be able to understand the fundamentals of how it works. You know what I mean? Not day trading, but actual investing in stocks, bonds, and different commodities, ladies and gentlemen. But like I said, more importantly, No, like I said, for who was that? Stephon Willis. No, Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. was nowhere near that. We already see this, Stephon, with the thing that you got to understand is we've already talked about Tupac being wrong. Like I said, we dealing with straight game. We ain't dealing with nothing lame. You know what I mean? We dealing with right. And like I said, I asked Tupac's father that, Billy Garland, and I was like, do you think that he was wrong for putting his hands on Orlando? He said absolutely, said yes. So we don't come to offer any kind of excuses, you know what I mean, for Tupac's behavior. You know what I mean? He paid the ultimate price for his behavior, which was his life. And so, but like I said, once again, when you deal with people who want to do this revisionist history about, them being responsible and the role that they played in the hate and the jealousy that they had against Tupac and all of those things, once again, you're talking about, and like I said, I'll say this again for Stephon, since he asked that question. Stephon, you asked that question. It wasn't made aware to me until recently that Tupac and them came out there the day of the fight. The day of the fight, right? Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. and them was out there the day before, according to him. Right? How come when Tupac got to the fight or to Las Vegas, being the biggest artist in the world at that time, was there not a security protocol in place for the biggest artist in the world? That ought to tell you right there his feelings. Not only that, but to know that Michael Moore was with Tupac earlier that day when they went to the MGM to gamble, right? And then walk back from the MGM over to the Luxor. Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. then would make a statement about how Tupac allegedly shook Frank because he didn't like Frank. And that's not actually what happened. Once again, trying to control the narrative and get you to believe these fictitious ass stories that one has to create based on proximity, based on, he was the head of security. No. The truth of the matter is that Tupac didn't shake Frank. He just felt like he wanted to go back over to the Luxor, and Michael Moore was with him early in the day. So how come right before? Listen, I'm gonna ask you again. How come right before they go into the fight, Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. pulls Michael Moore off of him? Tim Williams, who was also Michael Moore's roommate, confirmed that Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. pulled him off of him. Like I said, once again, when you understand the factual information, and this is something that Tim Williams actually said over there on Bums First. They tried to get him to come over there to lie. He wasn't going for it. He told exactly what happened and how it happened. And so, you know what I mean? So like I said, once again, when you have this Mopreme thing, him coming out with a book, once again, Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. trying to jump in, in on that conversation and have something to say, like he's a reliable individual for information when he's simply not that guy. He's never been that guy. He failed Tupac and Suge that night in Las Vegas. Like I said, they got the Vegas the night of the fight. There was no security apparatus ready to be able to handle what needed to happen. Not only that, Frank Alexander said that he asked for more security. Suge Knight said that he asked for more security, and Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. sent nobody. But then would lie and say, yeah, he talked to Tupac before Tupac was shot, and Tupac told him, why you got Frank on me? I told you I want Kevin Hackey. And Reggie basically lied about talking to He never talked to Tupac. He never talked to Tupac. Point blank, period. Frank Alexander was the only one that said he reached out for Tupac, finding out what Suge was, and also to let Suge know where he was when they were gambling early in that evening over at the MGM Grand. So you think about that for a minute. They get to Vegas the night of the fight. You got a 10-hour window? So in 10 hours, Tupac Shakur was shot and subsequently died from his injuries 6 days later. You get it? So when you understand that, you're not going to ask questions like, so Reggie told Tupac to hit Orlando. Of course not. Once again. But I understand where you're coming from. But like I said, intelligent individuals going to catch that. I'm going to catch it. I don't know if everybody else catch it. You know what I mean? No, Tupac was responsible for his own behavior. Period. What's up, Fatima? Fatima's in the building. Who else? J Bro. Through I Am. No, you can say, Stefan, you can say you don't believe Keefe D. You don't know what we believe. You don't speak for the masses, you speak for you. But I understand where you're coming from. You don't believe Keefe D or anybody, like I said once again. Yeah, once again, who is that? Lamar Wilson said, listen to this, y'all. I want you to understand. Lamar Wilson say, hey man, I love your show, but let's keep it real. We all know that Tupac is not dead. We don't all know nothing. You know that he's not dead. Once again, people always use the we. They use the we so loosely. No, you, Lamar, you know that he's not dead. I know that he's dead. I know that he's dead. He's resting in peace. Like I said, once again, there's an interview that soon might take place that you're going to find out some more information that you did not know about, ladies and gentlemen. Trust me. And so once again, I understand how you feel, man. You don't want Tupac to be dead. Like I said, but the music and the movies and all of that stuff live on. It lives on. Somebody said, finally caught up alive, met Tupac in 1993 in Detroit. He was so cool. Yeah, Pac was definitely a cool dude. Yeah, like I said, anybody who knows and understands that Tupac shouldn't have ran up on Orlando Anderson. Like I said, my thing is, I said it a long time ago, Tupac shouldn't even have been in that kind of mix. Point blank, period. You feel me? Like, dude, you rolling around on the ground, it's a whole nother world. Like I said, and that goes for structure. That goes for how one's handling one's business. Like I said, at the end of the day, certain information Tupac shouldn't even have been privy to. involving any type of gang activity or anything like that, or that was such and such Orlando. I mean, like I said, but hey, it was what it was, and it is what it is. What'd he say? William Manning said, I'm going to the court on August 10th. Yeah, that courtroom gonna be packed, man. The courtroom gonna be packed. You can imagine that. And like I said, once again, you got Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. them out here even predicting that Keefe D gonna take a plea. I don't know what he gonna do. You know what I mean? At this particular point, like I said, they say they got some documentary that they gonna work on. I don't know what nobody's gonna do, if you will, right? So, but like I said, once again, more importantly, when you think about the big picture, yeah, this is what it is. So like I said, ladies and gentlemen, I just had to bring you this good information, this straight game. And, stay tuned. Like I said, there's more to come. Check out the interviews over there on the Art of Dialogue. Your boy Delray, straight game.
Life is like some cards. It's not what you dealt, but how you play it. Play each situation correctly. I remember they used to laugh at a brother.